Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hey friend, welcome to our next episode in our faith series. I'm Esther, and today I'm here with Holly. Hey Holly.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Are you excited for this episode?
I am, but we haven't recorded in over a month, so
Yeah.
I feel like we're a little out of practice.
Yes.
I'm a little nervous.
Well, I hope that we can get through it. We've spent a lot of time preparing, so.
Yeah, I think we can do it.
Yes.
Hopefully it's like riding a bike.
I hope so. All right. So we hope that you have enjoyed the first 3 episodes in the faith series. We have discussed the importance of having a solid faith foundation. That was episode 58 that you and I did, Holly. And then we heard from Hillary Morgan Ferrer all about apologetics. And that was such a good conversation. Everybody that has listened that I've heard from has just said they've really appreciated it. And then last week we heard from Katie Cole, and you and I had an amazing discussion with her about women leaders in the church, and just so much good stuff in that conversation. So if you have missed any of these conversations related to our faith series, then I just encourage you to go back and check them out. You don't necessarily have to listen to them before this one because it's not like going in order or anything, but we probably will refer to some of those conversations in today's episode. So today we're going to dive into this idea of holding on to confidence or standing firm in the face of criticism, and specifically criticism from fellow Christians. Now, we touched on the idea that we will be persecuted as Christians in episode 58, but in that episode, we were really talking more about persecution from outside of the Christian world. And so today, we're going to talk more about what to do when we face criticism from within the body, from other Christian sisters and brothers, and from people that we're supposed to be experiencing unity with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's going to be a really good conversation.
Yeah, hard topic, but definitely needed.
Yeah.
But before we dive in, we want to share with you that this episode is supported by Audible. So the way this works is that Audible is offering you a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. And if you decide to use our link to get the trial membership, it helps support our podcast. And we really appreciate that because it helps cover our costs that we incur from creating this. So just go to estherlittlefield.com/audible and you can pick out your free title today. If you decide it's not for you, you can cancel at any time and you get to keep any of the titles that you've already downloaded. So Esther and I have talked about this a ton of times. We really enjoy Audible. It helps us get through some books that we may not have actually had time to sit down and read. So
yeah, exactly. And we have had so many amazing suggestions of books over the past year on the podcast. And like a large majority of them are on Audible. So if you are thinking, oh, I wish I had time to read more, or, I really would like to read some of these books and learn more about apologetics or learn more about, women in leadership or any of these things. Right. I mean, this is a great way to do it without, like you said, having to actually sit down and physically hold a book. You can listen while you're doing the dishes or while you're driving or whatever. So let's dig into this topic of criticism. And as we like to do on this podcast, we want to define what we mean by criticism, because
we like our definitions.
We do. And we were actually talking before we recorded about the fact that we discussed the issue of feedback on a previous episode. I think it was episode 8, where we talked about this issue of receiving feedback as a leader. And that's super important. But criticism is a little bit different than
Yeah.
just pure feedback. So, criticism, according to the dictionary, is the expression of disapproval of someone or something based on perceived faults or mistakes. So, it's kind of criticism sort of already has this inherently negative implication to it, right? It's
Right.
not always going to be something that makes you feel warm and cozy.
Yeah.
And if you are in leadership, you already know what it's like to receive
Mhm.
criticism. It's inherent in leadership because if you are in charge of anything or if you are taking a stand on anything, there is always going to be someone who will find something to have at fault. Right. But it's really unfortunate that it happens as much as it does within Christian circles. So we have some examples. And just in case you've been living under a rock and you haven't noticed
Yeah.
criticism as much as we have, then we actually asked in our Facebook group, what's the craziest thing you've ever been criticized for in the
Mhm.
church? And we have some examples to share, Holly, don't we?
do. We absolutely do.
Yeah. So we're going to share these without names and we're going to try to keep them general enough that no one can be implicated.
Implicated.
So, Holly, you want to share a couple of them to get us started?
Yes, I would love to. So the first one is you're too busy outside of church. So,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously,
Yeah. And
you
this was a pastor's wife that shared that. And I can totally relate because, again, pastor's wife over here. And she works and has other responsibilities besides just living at the church. And so she was being criticized for having other things that she was doing outside of
too many
church.
things outside the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But her pastor is the one that actually is the pastor. not
Her husband's the one being paid for the job.
Right. Yeah. Just to clarify.
Just to clarify.
Oh man. And then we had someone who was criticized for not going along with heading something up.
Mm-hmm.
And actually she was told by the person that requested her to do this thing that God had actually told her that it was meant that she was supposed to do it. Right. So Holy Spirit, Jesus, God, whoever said to me, Holly, you are supposed to head up this ministry.
Right.
This committee or this organization. But unfortunately, she had not received that same message. So she was criticized for not doing it.
I've had that happen to me before.
Oh, man.
And I always think, don't you think he should have told me?
Yeah. Probably he will tell both people if it's truly him.
I mean, I feel like you would know. Okay, the next one is someone who was working in many different capacities in the church, pursuing church membership and, doing lots and lots of different ministries within the church, was told that she did not have a heart for the church.
Yeah, right. Because we can measure someone's heart by what they're doing.
Yep. All right.
Mm-hmm. Then we had someone who, again, another pastor's wife, who decided to set some boundaries around her time with her husband and a weekly date night and just regular time as a family. Was criticized again for having those boundaries, which I can see. I see that a lot, unfortunately. Yeah.
We also had someone mention that in a women's group, they were criticized for being more analytical than emotional. And basically the gist behind that wasn't really feminine to be analytical.
Okay.
So
I guess I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm pretty analytical. Oh goodness. I totally related to what she said. And then on the other hand, many women are criticized for being too emotional.
That would be me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my word. Okay.
Yeah.
Then we have someone who was criticized for just questioning or providing thoughtful discussion in terms of theology. And she was criticized for having any kind of questions or input into that discussion.
Right.
I guess she didn't qualify for that discussion because she was a woman.
Right. Then we had someone else who was criticized for moving tables and chairs closer together in order to create community. She was apparently not really considering other people's opinions when she did that.
Okay.
So one person wrote that they were told that they weren't saved because they didn't do something in a manner with which a person who was saved did it.
Oh, right. Like she didn't follow the right method of getting saved.
Protocol, method. So
Okay.
Therefore she's not saved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh boy. All right.
That one makes me see a little bit of red, but we'll move on.
Okay. We're talking about responding to criticism. And so yeah, we might get to some of that.
I know reaction. I need to model it.
Okay. So then we have someone who decided that they would stay home with their babies when they were first born, like based on the recommendation of her doctor, and was criticized for not coming to church like the Sunday after the baby was born. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had other people who were criticized for working outside of the home, which was considered outside of what the person considered ministry.
Yeah. Right. So if you have a job, anything other than working at a church or directly in a ministry, then you are not spiritual enough or something. Okay.
And you're not really participating in ministry if you're out in the secular world.
I hope that everybody listening is really picking up on the sarcasm that we're using here.
Major sarcasm.
Not actually agreeing with these things.
No, we are not. We certainly do not.
All right. So we have one more example, and it's that you can't say something to someone because she's a highly anointed woman, right? So certain people are off limits when it comes to having any sort of discussion around biblical accuracy or theological discussions because they are like more anointed than you are.
Right.
Oh man, wish you guys could see our faces because we're struggling over here.
We're having I'm really like my lip is probably
do we need to take your blood pressure and like take a break?
Yes, probably because I can't. I just Okay. Anyway,
so
move on.
All right. So what I'm going to say about this is like I did ask for like what's the most ridiculous thing. So yes. I am grateful that these are some of the examples of ridiculous things to be criticized for. But as you're listening, I'm guessing you probably like have something you could add to this list, something that you've been criticized for. And it's true that as Christians, sometimes we can be the most critical people. And I will say that I'm guilty of that, just as I think all of us are at some point. But I find it super easy to pick out when something isn't being done right, or when I think someone should change an approach within our church, or we should take a different tactic or whatever. So I can say that as we're going through this episode, it's as much on the side for me. I want to think about this not just from the perspective of receiving criticism, but also being less inclined to give it.
Right.
Because it's not good to criticize just every little thing that you disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to be clear that we're not saying that there is not a time and place for confronting someone when there is actually an issue to be addressed. And we have discussed that on previous episodes. There is a time when criticism is warranted. And so there could also be times when, we need to address false teaching or ways that someone has gone off track. And I think that often the key with that is to address the idea or the teaching rather than to attack the person, or their character. So we can disagree with ideas without actually attacking someone's character. So again, but that's not really what we're talking about in this episode. Right. We're really talking about more what you can do when you experience criticism and how you can stand firm and move forward, even if you feel like people are attacking you or, criticizing your every move.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important that first we identify the different categories of criticism that you might experience from fellow Christians. It's good to identify what form it's taking so you can help process and be able to move forward and figure out how you want to handle it. So the first one is personal criticism. So this is someone that says something directly to you about something you did or said or believed, etc. I mean, it could be anything really, but it's personal criticism that someone says directly to you.
Yeah, right. Okay, so then there would be public criticism, and this is a similar thing, but they've actually said this criticism in a public space. So they may have done it, inside of a small group or in front
Mhm.
of a whole group of people at your church or in your workplace, or it could even be something that they've shared on social media about you, but you've directly either seen it or heard it, you know that it happened.
Right. And then the third one is suspected criticism. It's where you actually suspect someone is being critical of you based on their behavior or their interactions with you, but you haven't actually heard or seen it directly.
Yeah. And that one is kind of tricky because it can
Yeah.
feel very, very real. And we'll
Yes.
talk a little bit about this later on, but this one I think is probably the toughest one to deal with because you
Mm,
haven't actually you don't actually have proof of it,
right.
and it's kind of falls into the gossip category of
Yes.
you think it's happening but you don't really know. So,
You're not actually sure. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's criticism by association. So this one would be when someone has criticized your business or your church or your ministry or a group that you're involved with, but
Hmm.
it's not criticism that's directed at you directly. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
like you work for a certain organization and that organization is being criticized and you're part of it. So, you're
Right.
associated with it. You probably are feeling it, but it's not about you directly. So,
Oh, that one can be really difficult because I don't know about you, but like when I'm part of something, I feel like 100% in.
yeah.
So if someone is criticizing that thing that I'm in, it feels like they are directly criticizing me.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so yeah.
It can feel just as real as the first one, which
Yes,
is the personal. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So I think what we want to do now is talk about what to do when you experience criticism. And we're
Mhm.
going to spend most of our time on what to do. But then at the end, we kind of have a couple things not to do as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just to let you know, where we're going to take this conversation.
Mhm.
We have several points to go through here. So hopefully will not take forever to do this. But the first thing that you want to do when you experience criticism is start with the truth. What do you know to be true? And I would
Right.
say you want to look at a couple things in terms of this category is what is true about God. So always start with God. What's true about
Right.
him? And then what's true
Mhm.
about you? What is true about what God says about you, about your place and your standing with him, and about where your true value lies.
In my mind, I kind of think of this as like laying down your non negotiables. So, no matter what someone says to you, these things are non negotiable. So, no matter what someone says, I'm not going to throw into question what I know about God,
Mhm.
what I know He said about me, what I know about my value. No matter what criticism comes, these things are non negotiable.
Yeah.
And so, these really are a foundation that come from the Bible and reading God's word and understanding what he has said about himself, what he said about you, and the things that he has gifted you with. That this also is about like your gifts, your skills, your calling, those things that you know that you know that you know.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's really important to just have a really good foundation of those non-negotiables.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
and part of that for me is knowing that I'm loved by God no matter
Yep.
what. That's one of those non-negotiables that
Mhm.
I know and
Yep.
that is not I cannot be an effective leader if I don't start with that foundation of knowing that I'm loved by him. Because
Right.
if I am looking for affirmation or value or approval from anything outside of that, then I'm going to struggle, right?
Mhm.
If I receive criticism and I'm not firmly rooted in this idea of being loved by God and my
Mhm.
value coming from him, then things are going to fall apart real quickly when
Yeah.
I experience that criticism. So Psalm 27:8 says this, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They collapse and fall, but we rise and stand upright. And so I just love that reminder that when we are trusting in God, that's how we can stand firm. That's how we stand upright. And if
Right.
our trust is in anything else, we are going to waver and fall.
And I think that goes back to sort of the topic of this whole thing is our foundation. And I think that when we find that our faith is kind of rocked, that's a good indicator that that part of our faith foundation wasn't built on God. It was built on someone's approval or affirmation of others or someone else's faith, something like that. So it's really important to have your entire faith foundation be built on God, God's word, what he says about himself, what he says about you, because when those storms or criticisms or hard things that we go through, that faith foundation won't be shaken because it's not dependent on circumstances or people or words that other people say. It's based solely and firmly on God and his word. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
And we're not saying by any stretch that criticism is going to be fun or enjoyable, but it will not be able to destroy you.
Right.
If you have that solid foundation, like you're saying, the truth, the things that are non-negotiable. And,
Right.
This is actually something that I talked about in episode 6, way back at the beginning of this podcast, with this concept of leading with confidence and being able to move into leadership and exercise leadership with confidence. It all starts with that idea of having your foundation based on God. So if you want to kind of dig deeper into that, I would encourage you to go back and listen to episode 6.
Right. So that was number 1, and that was starting with the truth, really laying down that, solid truth foundation. Number 2, we're going to talk about evaluating the source of the criticism. So I think this one is important because you're trying to figure out, who is this person that's lobbing criticism at you? Is it someone that you're close to? Someone with a track record of being negative or grumpy about stuff, or someone who really rarely speaks up or complains? So perhaps this person is not really in a good place to be criticizing others, but perhaps there's someone who you trust and their words should be heeded. So it's really kind of important to make that contrast and figure out where this person lands. Is this something that really should be taken into consideration, or should it be more easily dismissed?
Yeah.
Because we just know that that person is not in a good place and doesn't really have the authority to speak into our lives in a really profound way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is really so key because it is really easy to take all criticism the same,
Yeah.
like to lump it all into one bucket. And I've heard the phrase, and I'm trying to remember where I heard it, but it's basically not all criticism is created equal. And,
Yeah.
it's that idea of figuring out who is it coming from. And that's a big
Right.
factor in whether or not I am going to do something with it, right? Like some
Right.
criticism based on where it's coming from is just going to like literally go in the trash, and I'm just not even gonna deal with it.
Yeah.
So
In one ear and out the other.
yeah, but yeah, I think that step 2 of evaluating the source is so key in being able to determine. And these things that we're going through, these steps that we're talking about, we're kind of building on each other to help you decide what to do about the criticism. So each of these
Exactly.
topics is something to take into consideration before you act on the criticism. So, yeah.
Yep.
All right. So step 3 is to consider the actual content of the criticism. So once you know where it has come from, now you can think about, what was the criticism about? What type of criticism was it? So we can go back to those different categories that we talked about, whether it was personal or public, or, all those. Okay. Identify which of those it was and figure out what they're actually criticizing. So
Right.
here's a question to think about was any part of that criticism warranted or valid? So
Yeah.
it's not easy, but you might need to think about,
Right.
okay, maybe there's some truth in this criticism. Even if it's coming from someone that maybe doesn't necessarily have a close relationship with you, there might still be an element of truth in the criticism. Okay. And then you can also evaluate whether it was a criticism of something you did or said, or was it a criticism of who you are? Like,
Hmm.
was it something about just an incident that happened that you did something, or like is it more about your character? So I have an example. I don't know if it's the best example, but it's like someone saying, I don't like the way she dresses versus
Right.
I think she is too assertive.
Right.
Like the first one is like not really about who you are, and the second one is about your character or your personality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, yes, I do. Say no, but I do. I think it's important to separate whether it's about something you did or said or whether it's about who you are, because I think that a lot of times, like, I can take someone saying something about the way I dress just as heavily as I would take someone saying something about my character. And that's not
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have to like the way that I dress. That's fine. Like, that I'm not dressing for them. Like,
Mhm.
you know, but when it comes to your character, that's like such a, I don't want to say low blow, but it's definitely more intimate and it's more like deeper within a person. And so I think it's really important to sift out of the comment or the criticism where that exactly lands so that we can assign the correct weight to it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I can take I mean, I can take all criticism as just a complete personal assault to my being,
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
And that's
Oh,
I
me
think
too.
that's why we're trying to just walk through this, because I know for myself I've had to really work on assessing this part of like what is actually being criticized.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to mention here too, if you identify that the criticism falls into the suspected criticism category,
Mm,
I'm going to suggest that you just pray about it and turn it over to God.
yeah.
Because if you're just hearing through the grapevine that someone doesn't like something about you, blah blah blah, like, or if you I don't know, I feel like that falls into that assumption that you're perceiving something that may not actually be happening. So
Yeah.
we talked about this on last week's episode with Katie Cole,
Mhm.
and about this concept of sometimes we have our own sticky floors, and
Yeah.
we have our own limits or preconceived ideas about what people believe about us or what they're thinking about us that affect how we lead. But
Mm.
if someone hasn't actually said, "Oh, I don't like the way you're doing blah blah blah," or "I don't think you should be doing XYZ," then we shouldn't be wasting our time and energy on that thought.
Right.
Because it's really possible that that may not actually be happening. Like they may not actually be thinking that thing.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
I think too, something to kind of remember about this is to kind of think about that person's proximity to you. In other words, is this a really close friend that has kind of shied away or stopped kind of engaging with you in a certain area, and you're so therefore you're feeling that as criticism, or is this someone that's kind of further away from you that you've just noticed a difference in their attitude? And I think that kind of plays into this a little bit as
Mhm.
well, because the closer the person is to you, while I agree with you, Esther, like for the most part, this stuff just needs to be kind of turned over and prayed about and just let God handle it. If it's someone that's really close to you, a lot of times that's not something you can ignore, especially if it's they kind of ice up when you talk about a certain ministry or whatever. Sometimes it's important to say to them, "Hey, I've noticed," and a one-on-one, "Hey, I've
Yeah.
noticed that your attitude is a little bit different when it comes to this. You have to do this very kindly and with someone that you have a good relationship with. Is there an issue? Is there a problem? Something we can talk about?"
Yeah.
If it's someone that's a little bit further away, that might not be taken as well. And so I think it's really good to kind of assess the proximity of this person to you in your world, because perhaps the perceived coldness or attitude change has nothing to do with you. Maybe it has something to do with something completely different, but you're taking it as criticism or you're taking it personally when really there's nothing there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
So
what do you think about that? I kind of disagreed with you, and I want to know if you,
no, I love that you brought that up, because yeah,
yeah.
I totally agree that if there's a time where there's someone in your life that you care about and there's a change or just a vibe or something that you're sensing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to just totally ignore that.
Yeah.
And then what
Yeah.
you just ended on is kind of bringing to the next point that I was going to make is that we have
Yeah.
to stop being offended about everything.
Right.
And as leaders, we should not be looking for reasons to be offended or to assume that somebody thinks something about us either because we're a woman or because we are in a certain role
Mm-hmm.
or from a certain part of the country. Like, I think that
Mm-hmm.
we sometimes are looking for reasons to be upset that aren't actually there. And
Yeah.
that kind of goes back to that sticky floor idea. Like, we sometimes are our own worst enemies because
Mm-hmm.
of the things that we are making up in our head.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I think that segues perfectly into our next category or our next step here, number 4, which is consider your motives and intentions. Evaluating like what kind of space you're in right now or where have you already been struggling. I feel like that perfectly goes along with that
yeah.
because a lot of times when I'm already feeling defeated or discouraged or insecure about what I'm doing or where I'm going, then those other outside things that I perceive feed right into that when they a lot of times have nothing to do with me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you can, yeah, you can evaluate your intentions in this situation and you may find out that there was something you weren't expecting or anticipating. And maybe it was based on pride. Maybe it was the fact that they've hurt your pride and, I don't know. I know Esther and I are very, very similar in this way that like when we work on something, we put our all into it. And so it's really hard for us not to have like pride or, a sense of ownership or
Yeah.
entitlement to a project or a ministry or something. And so
Mhm.
when someone criticizes it, it's an immediate hit on our pride. Would you kind of agree with that,
Uh,
do you think?
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that probably my biggest struggle in recent years in this area of criticism has been when I've received feedback or criticism on a project, either in work at
Yeah.
the church or client work related.
Mhm.
It's something that I have, like you said, like really invested a lot of energy and time and
Yeah.
passion into. And if I have the slightest feeling that someone is not happy with the results
Mhm.
or, want something changed, I can quickly like just take that so personally. And often
Yeah.
because, like you said, the issue of pride and that I am finding some value in that thing that I did and finding some
Right.
identity there that I shouldn't be. And that really can be a problem.
Yeah. And I think if you're listening to this podcast, most often you're similar to us to some extent in this way. I mean, you are multi passionate, you put yourself into a lot of things, and you may have very different personality from us, but at the same time, you are really asserting yourself in a lot of different areas. And so when there's criticism in those things, it can really kind of bump into your pride of doing a good job. Or for me personally, I feel like every decision I make, I overanalyze it and I've analyzed every tiny little thing. And so when someone has come and said, well, you didn't think about this, or, hey, this made me feel a certain way, it immediately hits me in that pride because I feel like, oh my gosh, I've already overanalyzed this and I missed something, or I didn't take that into consideration. And that's like a huge thing for me,
Yeah.
to feel like I dropped the ball or I missed something, or, I didn't perceive that would come across a certain way. So
Yeah.
yeah, this whole idea of considering your motives and intentions and kind of really examining where you're at when you're hearing this. And perhaps the thing that was said wasn't even criticism at all.
Yeah.
You just perceived it that way
Yeah.
because of where you're at. So,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to number 5. That is, remember that this criticism might not actually be about you and it might not be about the other person. So
Yeah.
there could be something more going on. And really what we're talking about here is the issue of spiritual warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ephesians 6:10-17 says this, and this is kind of long, but I'm going to read the whole thing. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness. And as for shoes for your feet, having put on readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. All right, so that's the end there. And I just, when I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking about the fact that, I think sometimes these kinds of situations and criticism within the church towards other Christians actually is spiritual warfare going on.
Yeah.
Because, again, this verse reminds us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Mm-hmm. And so what we might perceive as this person is attacking me and this person is being mean to me or whatever the case might be, they may not even be really intentionally trying to hurt us, but there may be this spiritual warfare going on, and Satan is trying to use the situation to discourage us and to cause us to want to just quit, walk away, stop doing whatever God has called us to do.
Right. And I think, honestly, if there's one thing that gets us off track the fastest, it's Christians fighting against each other. And because we're putting our energy into squabbling or fighting or however you want to call it with each other, rather than putting our energy toward expanding the kingdom of God or, doing what he's called us to do. And honestly, like, Satan would like nothing more than to have that happen.
Yeah, because that is distracting us from the true mission that God has given us.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, I've thought many times about writing back in the day, like maybe 10 years ago. Do you remember when like yoga pants was the big debate in the Christian school?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was so fired up about it. And I was like, this is so stupid. Like, we are arguing about yoga pants.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that have to do with reaching people for the kingdom of Christ?
Yeah. Agreed.
And helping people experience transformation and life change that truly it matters in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that Satan uses these types of things to distract us. So what we need to do in this point here is to actually put on the armor of God, to be prepared for battle and to be firm, to be able to stand firm in the face of criticism. And again, this could be from within the church or without. I think that this passage is not specifically talking about criticism within the church at all. It's talking about spiritual warfare and being prepared. And so either way, having this preparation will help us to defend against whatever we are facing, right, and to also kind of keep our focus on what's most important instead of getting distracted by all of these things.
Right. Agreed. And, in the grand scheme of things, we should be sort of fighting elbow to elbow against what the devil is doing rather than being turned towards each other.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think just want to add one more thing there is that, again, like we said before, we're not saying that there are not times within the Christian community that we need to have discussions about important topics, and that there needs to be some healthy debate around theology and key cultural issues that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a place for that. But I think that sometimes we can get a little too caught up in that, where it takes our eye off the ball of what's really important.
Agreed. Okay, our final point is number 6, respond or take action. So this is after you've done all of the above. We feel like now is a good point where you can respond to the criticism, or you can choose not to respond to the criticism.
Yeah.
So we really feel like those are kind of your two options. Not responding, in my opinion, is an active response because I have to actively not address the issue. And that's really difficult for me to keep my mouth shut. Or we can choose to either have a rebuttal or handle the situation.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the first one, not responding. So maybe this isn't a battle that you need to fight. Sometimes staying silent is really the best option. And one of the best examples that we can kind of come up with for that is basically Jesus when he was on the cross and he was being ridiculed. Matthew 27:11-14 says, "Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And he said, 'You have said so.' But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, 'Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?' But he gave him no answer, not even a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed." And then just to kind of go along with this, 1 Peter 2:23 says, "When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly." And I just think that, like, if we are going to have any type of really good example of not responding and being silent, this is probably the best one that we can, that we can look to.
Yeah.
And I love the end of the 1 Peter verse where it talks about he continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. And I just love that because I think it speaks to kind of what I was saying before about being silent is not doing something.
Yeah.
Jesus is actively entrusting himself to God, who he knew was the best judge there could be. And so for me, that really helps me because I feel like I need to actively do something or I need to actively respond when something like that happens. And so for me to feel like I can just continue to entrust myself to God, who is a better judge than even we are, obviously, it makes me feel like I'm doing something. It's difficult for me to not do something. And so for me, that's helpful. But there are times when, we just need to be still and kind of allow God to work. So
Yeah. And I came across a really good article about this idea of remaining silent as leaders, which is not easy for most of us to do. Right. So I'm going to put, that in the show notes because I would encourage you, if this is a struggle for you and you're really struggling with holding back and not responding, then I would encourage you to listen or to read that article.
Yeah.
And another possibility of what you might need to do in this whole category of not responding is that you might need to take a break from whatever is going on. So, maybe you need to take time to process. If you identified that your current state right now is not healthy, if you realized, oh man, I'm really struggling with like 7 different things, and that's why this criticism has really caused me to struggle, then maybe you have to step away from something for a little while or go get help or, talk to a therapist, talk to somebody who can direct you and guide you. Maybe it's a spiritual director, but sometimes you might need to do that as part of this not responding phase.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Thoughts on that?
I think you've covered it all. I think it's just really important, like we said, to evaluate where you are.
Yeah.
And if you need to take that break to be able to do those personal things, you need to do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So let's move to the second part of this, which is maybe you do need to respond. And, I think that there are times where you might receive criticism from someone that you're in an ongoing relationship with. You want to maintain a healthy relationship and you might need to address their criticism of you.
Right.
But, the key here is to do it with gentleness and respect. And to use some biblical guidance in how you respond. We have Proverbs 15:1 says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So we know that the way that we should, if we respond, should not be with harshness, right?
Right.
And that's my tendency. Like if I'm criticized, I want to react really quickly, and usually with some kind of harsh response that is going to put the person in their place.
Yep.
So,
Agreed.
but that's not a good way to do it. And then James 1:19-20 says, my beloved brothers, understand this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For man's anger does not bring about the righteousness that God desires. So again, it's this idea of in our response, it's not saying that we should never speak or respond to something, but we need to do it with a slower response than sometimes we naturally want to do, right?
Yeah. This kind of makes me think about, those people in your life that don't say a whole lot, but when they do, you really listen. I think that if we as leaders respond to every little tiny criticism or every little tiny thing, then people are going to stop listening. They're just going to see us as combative or super reactive. And so I think that this verse really talks to that. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. I think that really enables us to kind of have that presence about us, that when we are actually responding, people will listen. People will sit up and take notice, and they will be astonished, like it says Pilate was. They will be astonished with our response and our gentleness and our respect. And I think that's a much better place for a leader to be in than to be constantly giving in to the criticism in a really reactive way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And we don't have this in our notes, but First John talks about that the world will know us by our love.
Yeah.
And so even when you think about, you mentioned this idea of Christians like fighting within each other, within our own circle. When the world looks at that, are they seeing us do that in a way that is still loving? Because you don't have to agree with people to love them.
Right.
And
exactly.
we can disagree within our Christian circles and even criticize or discuss ideas in a loving way, that even if we don't agree. But are we basing this on love, and are we doing it in a loving way, or are we doing it in a, I'm right, I have to defend my point, you're an idiot? Like there's two kind of different extremes we can take here.
Exactly. Yeah.
So important. We just went through 6 things to do when you experience criticism. We want to wrap up with 2 things not to do when you experience criticism. And I think that these are important to mention. And the first one I want to share is don't stop saying hard things. Don't stop standing up for things that God has put on your heart. And so as leaders, it's inherent. We are going to say things that are going to cause other people to criticize us.
Yeah.
Even when we say them in the most loving and caring way, if we are standing up for biblical truth or God's purposes or sharing Jesus, whatever it is, that's going to be sometimes offensive to people, even other Christians. Like even other Christians are going to disagree with us. But just because we receive that criticism, it does not mean that we should stop doing what we're doing. And really, criticism is often a sign that you're on the right track. Because if you're only saying things that everybody agrees with, you're never actually saying anything of long-standing importance.
Yeah.
So
It says in the Bible that in the end days, people will only listen to things that sort of tickle their ears.
Yeah.
Things that only really make them feel good, that they like to hear.
Yeah.
People don't like to hear that they're sinful and that they have things they need to work on, and that no, their responses are not always the greatest. So like if you're standing up for truth, that is going to hit people right square in their sinful nature.
Yeah.
And when that happens, people bite back.
Yep.
Whether they are Christians or non-Christians, it's going to happen. So if you are speaking the truth in love and you are called to be one of those people that is supposed to speak out into society or have any type of influence, these sorts of things are going to happen.
Yep.
So don't stop saying the hard things. Fill them with even more love and even more grace and even more truth, but don't stop saying them.
Yeah. And I will say, I mean, this is one of the areas for me that I've had to wrestle with, because as I have a Facebook page and I have an email list and I have places where, there's some people watching what I'm saying. And there's times when I think about sharing something and sometimes I struggle with, if I say this, there's going to be people that unfollow me. There's going to be people that could leave me a negative review. There's going to be people who will unsubscribe, and so it's easier sometimes to not say what I sense God putting on my heart to say. But that's, for the fear of the criticism, for the fear of having someone be unhappy with me. But that's not where God is calling us to live as leaders.
No, definitely not. So the next thing that we think is important not to do when you experience criticism is don't forsake the fellowship. And sometimes this can be a hard one. A lot of times when we endure a lot of criticism from people within our own circles, it's super easy to shrink back and stop being engaged and to kind of leave church, if you will.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to not forsake the fellowship. In Hebrews 10:25, it says, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So I think that this a lot of times is taken out of context, as in, you miss one service and you're forsaking the fellowship. That's not what I'm talking about here.
Right.
I'm talking about extended periods of time, years, even maybe for entire seasons, to kind of lick your wounds. And that's not really what we're talking about here. Even in the verse, it says the meeting together, but encouraging one another. So the idea of meeting together is to be encouraged. And a lot of times being in that space with the right people and being sort of ministered to by the church is what's actually going to help heal those wounds. I'm not saying that you can't take a break. I'm not saying that you can't sort of process and heal, but I don't think that that means that you need to leave church or forsake the fellowship. Because the point of the matter at the very end of this verse is, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So our focus is about reaching others, because the day drawing near is the day that Jesus is going to come back. And so we are to be looking to that day and to be working towards that, not squabbling with others or sort of inwardly focused. And as I said before, like licking our wounds. So do you have anything to say about that?
I think that this is a good principle, that if you've experienced criticism or hurt, don't allow that situation to prevent you from future, the beauty and the healing and the restoration that can happen inside of a church community.
Right.
Like you said, Holly, like there may be times where you have to step away or you need to have some healing, or, it needs to look different, but long term, I think you're missing out if you're choosing not to re-engage in that type of community.
Agreed. And I think too, like, as we've mentioned tons and tons of time before, if you're in leadership, you are going to experience criticism. It's just going to happen. So knowing that it's something that we can expect. And with this topic of our faith foundation, if you have the good foundation and you know that it's coming, we're hoping that it's not going to throw you for as big of a loop as this kind of implies.
Yeah.
If you're willing to forsake the fellowship, then you've been hurt super, super bad. And so we're hoping that you being able to have the strong foundation and anticipate the criticism or, the flaming darts of the enemy or all of these things should help you stand firm in a way that will allow you to not shrink back. I know that I hope that was clear.
Yeah. And really we are not, and I want to just kind of go back to what I was saying. Like, I don't want anybody to walk away from this episode feeling like horrible about yourself.
No.
We want to give you some tips, and again, trying to base them on the biblical truth that God has given us in terms of how to move forward and how to stand firm and how to keep going. Because what you are doing matters, and your ministry matters, and your example to others matters. And so if you allow criticism to stop you, to throw you off, to completely derail what God is doing in your life, we don't want to see that happen. So we want to see you be able to stand and keep moving and going forward, because this is tough. Like, this isn't easy stuff to go through, but we can move forward, and God has given us everything we need to do it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Agreed.
All right. So we're going to wrap up. Whew, I don't know how long this has been, but we've had a few interruptions, but we want you to come back next week, because next week's episode is all about this idea of getting in the Word on a daily basis and how that can transform your spiritual walk. So I'm so excited for you to hear that episode with Tabitha Big B, one of our friends and a listener of the podcast. So make sure that you're subscribed so that you can listen. But we're going to wrap up with our ending question. So,
okay.
All right.
I'm going to ask you. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
I know your answer.
Oh,
or I think I know your answer.
Okay.
So, Esther, what is your favorite game to play?
Okay. So, super nerd alert, but I love Settlers of Catan.
I knew it.
Yeah. It's like, really, if you know that game, I need to know about it in the Facebook group. I know it was kind of really popular, like in college days, or college students seem to really be into it. But anyway, I love it. I don't play it very often because my husband refuses to play it as a 2-person game. Just to annoy me mostly. No, not really. But like, he just doesn't like, he likes playing it with more people than just 2 people. Yeah. And we have the kids version, which is fun. So we play that as a family sometimes, but I really need like a few of my friends who also enjoy the game to get together and play it every once in a while. So what about you?
Well, is Scott a game player? Like, will he just play games with you? Like, hey, honey, let's play a game?
Not really.
Yeah. No, Zach isn't either.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
We every once in a while I can convince him. But I love games. I love playing games. So
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
All right. Well, what's yours? What's your favorite game?
So I have 2, and for different reasons. So I think one of my like long-term favorite games is cribbage. And that one is like super nostalgic to me just because I learned from my grandparents. I just remember being at their house and people sitting around playing cribbage and learning as a little kid. And so that's really nostalgic for me. And it also means summertime camp. We play a lot of cribbage at camp during the summertime. And so that game just has a lot of memories for me. I wouldn't say it's like my most favorite game to play, like the actual playing of it, but it just has a lot of really good memories. And my son is really, really good at it. He like kicks my butt 90% of the time. But the other game that I really like is Spades. It's a 4-person game and it just has a lot of strategy to it. And I think it's similar to you. Like, I like being in a bigger group playing games. I just think it's fun to have, you know, that kind of community and relationship with lots of different people. So that's one of my favorite ones.
Awesome.
Also, I'm good at it. So,
well, that's always good. That's always good. Okay. One more question we're tacking on here. Do you have to win? when you play games?
So so I'm extremely competitive. I really, really like to win,
Yeah.
but I think this has to do with my personality. Like, I just really enjoy being with people and playing. So I don't have to win to have a good time.
Okay.
Like, I wouldn't go to bed at night thinking, oh man, like that really sucked because I didn't win.
Yeah.
Like, I would be like, oh man, I didn't win. But like, I would really be focusing on the fact that I spent really good quality time with people. So what about you?
Awesome. Kind of the same. I really, really like to win. So like, I won't do anything to help someone else out in the game.
Oh no.
I mean,
absolutely.
Whereas my husband will do that and my daughter will do that. They'll be like, oh, do you need this piece? I'm like, no, that's not how the game works.
Oh no, the rules must be abided by to a T.
Yeah.
And I don't like extra rules being made up. I like to play the original. Do you?
The rules of the game in the insert
in the package
is what you're supposed to do. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no. I do not like making up extra rules. No. Or house rules. No.
Oh, all right. Well, we're going to ask this question in our Facebook group. So if you are not over there in the Facebook group, you need to head on over to our show notes for this episode. Click on the link that says join the group or put your name and email in there and come in and tell us your thoughts on games and rules and winning and all of the things. So
we would love to hear it.
Yep. All right. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving us a rating and review in your podcast app? This helps more women just like you find the podcast, and it also helps them to know whether the podcast would be a good fit for them. Just go to the show in your podcast app, then scroll down until you see the option for ratings and reviews. From there, you can tap to rate and write a review. It means the world to us when you take a couple minutes to do this, and thank you so much to everyone who has left a review. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.